So they have a legal and compliance department that is focused solely on financial compliance and on the other systems they have with HR and payroll compliance. And there are regular updates that go out in terms of making sure that there's updates to adhere to whatever the legislation is. So although you talk about VAT and tariff changes that are happening currently within South African context, in the payroll side, there's always changes in terms of tax tables and what is happening within the SARS environment to make things a little bit more efficient from a revenue collections perspective. Sage are on top of that. The great thing also about the systems is that they are cloud-based. Now, take Sage Intacct, for example, there's 4 releases a year. So any anticipated change can be built into those releases in the 4 releases a year. And when you log in the morning, those changes are then handled. So from a peace of mind, from a CFO perspective, if there's some major change in legislation coming up, Sage would have dealt with it, built it into the software, scheduled into the release, and when you plug in the morning, it's going to be there. So that, from a peace of mind perspective, is massive. In terms of actually proactively then managing it from your perspective as a CFO, the reality is that you want to have access to your data as quick as possible to manage it. You want to be able to forecast, you want to be able to understand what the impact would be if the tariff changes a certain percentage. Now, in most financial systems, especially in the olden days, everything had to be downloaded into Excel to give you that flexibility that you would like to have within the system. Excel being the most fluid, easy to use tool, and still probably one of the most widely used software solutions in the world. However, the software themselves are getting better. So Sage Intacct, for example, comes out of the box with a financial report designer, which has very much a lot of the functionality of Excel, with the rows and columns, the drag and drop, the adding of predefined sums and formulas that you can actually then put into your reports. The other benefit is obviously with the dimensional reporting system that it has the dimensions to slice and dice the data as you would do with the massive pivot table. The massive tick box, though, is while you're using Sage Intacct, is that you're working on live data. In Excel, if you ever wanted to work on the data, it is generally delayed and won't be updated as you're working on it because you're working in a completely different system. Intacct is working on the live data. The great thing also is that they understand that just having a report on what's happening in your business is not enough anymore. To focus on what's happening in tariffs, or if there's going to be a VAT change, you want to actually build those into models. Best case, worst case, medium case sort of scenarios, and see what happens. Maybe you want to pull data from other systems. That's when something like Sage Intacct Planning comes into play, where you can actually start forecasting and budgeting and using scenarios to actually play around with your data to have what's going on. The great thing about Sage Intacct Planning, it's also an online system. It's an online collaboration tool which allows you to do budgeting and forecasting without actually taking data out of the system. However, it also allows you to bring data in from other sources. So if you want to bring in your headcount data from your payroll system, or you want to bring in something from your sales system, you can bring that in and bring it all together with your impact data and play around with the data. You also don't then have different versions of Excel spreadsheets floating around the whole business. There's one collaborative tool where everyone gets visibility, and one controller or multiple controllers can then move around and play around with the data to get the forecast. And it can be done in real time on data that you have available. So if something suddenly changes, VAT rate changes, VAT rate doesn't change, we don't know what's going to happen in the South African environment, it can be handled because the system is being updated automatically with real-time data, and you can get visibility. I think if we look back at when we were in COVID and no one knowing what was happening, I know myself, I was in business where we were doing budgets almost every week to reforecast based on the feedback we were getting from markets and credit unions. Now, in a system like Sage Intacct, the stress of doing that would be so much less, and the data that the information we're getting would be so much accurate to make better business decisions for the benefit of the whole organization.